Salona, located in modern Split, Croatia, was the capital of the Roman province of Dalmatia. It existed and prospered because of its geography. On a central bay in the eastern Adriatic, beside a river, at the foot of the Klis Pass, which offers access into the interior of the Balkans. It started as a Greek trading post about 300 years BC. At the time, it was surrounded by the largely untamed Illyrian tribe, the Dalmatae, sheep herders who liked to send raiding parties into neighboring territories and ambush traders. For a couple of hundred years, Rome fought a number of uprisings with the tribe until finally subduing it in the first few years AD. Dalmatia had been made a Roman province by Julius Caesar. Salona was the Roman center, and Salona grew into a prosperous city over the centuries. The Roman town, the ruins of which we are strolling today, was a walled city fortified with watchtowers. Over the centuries, the city spread out in a large, irregular fashion, and the walls were expanded to encompass the urban sprawl. The 2nd century was a dangerous world, and barbarian Germanic tribes just outside the borders of the now civilized and thoroughly Romanized Dalmatia always threatened. Salona reached the apex of its importance in the 3rd century. The Emperor Diocletian was born in Salona and built his massive retirement palace at Split, not far away. By the year 300, Split was a cosmopolitan trading center of more than 60,000 people, with inhabitants coming from all over the Roman world. It was a home for all manner of cultures and religions, including a Jewish community and the upstart Christian cult. In fact, Salona could be called a hotbed of Christianity, with early efforts to start a church there and in the Dalmatian hinterlands being largely successful. More than one Salonian bishop was martyred. The great Emperor Diocletian helped stabilize and organize the vast Roman Empire, but he may always be remembered best for his savage persecution of the Christians. The Amphitheatre at Salona was often witness to the classic Christians versus lions savagery. Several of the emperor's own guards were executed for their Christian faith. By the end of the century, the tables would flip, and the Roman emperor would declare Christianity was the only permitted religion. Salona was soon constructing churches and basilicas as culture switched from the arenas to the altars. Salona carried on for a couple more centuries as a Christian Roman city, surviving the collapse of the unified Roman Empire and various barbarian incursions, bruised but not broken. Everything came to an end, however, in the 600s with the arrival of the Avars and Slavs, tribes from Central Asia coming in as mercenaries for Byzantium or ne'er-do-wells after the collapse of the Roman authority. Salona was ripe for the smashing, and the inhabitants abandoned it for the walls of Diocletian's palace or became slaves. Salona was abandoned. The first thing you encounter when dropped off at the gates of the Salona complex by your driver is the Monasterein. This is the basilica and graveyard complex built by the Christian community of Salona starting in the 300s. It was already a pagan cemetery for the Roman population by the 1st century. When the bishop was martyred in the arena in 304, he was buried here, and a complex developed around his tomb. Over the centuries, as the Christian community grew and prospered, more elaborate graves and constructions were erected, and it must have been a beautiful building filled with marble and statuary when the barbarians smashed their way in during the mid-600s. One of the most interesting aspects of Salona I found was the extensive evidence of barbarians smash and grab grave robberies, although I can't quite figure out why they didn't just lift the lids off. Perhaps they were cemented on. The whole area is a vast open-air cemetery where Roman Christians buried their dead in sarcophagi and mausoleums, as close to the martyred Bishop Domnius' tomb as possible. Many examples of Roman tombs from Salona can be found in the Archaeological Museum in Split. This house belonged to Monsignor Fran Bullock, the father of Croatian archaeology, who lived here and studied the site. The aforementioned Archaeological Museum in Split houses his most important artifacts, but there is just a small museum here. As you walk down the gravel road, you were heading towards the original walled city of Salona. At first, the part you see here was the walled section having fortifications and towers as early as the 3rd century. It was a rough neighborhood, but the 5th century AD walls enclosed 4 square kilometers of urban area. In this area, you will find the Episcopal Center, an area of cathedrals and bishops' palaces. I'm a little unclear on how it differs from the Basilica up the hill in the graveyard. Perhaps they needed a lot of basilicas back then. Behind the Episcopal Center are the baths, a series of thermal pools heated by wood furnaces, saunas, spas, and change rooms. Public baths were a habit the Romans and later Christian inhabitants of Salona carried on. You can see traces of the aqueducts that supplied water to the baths in some homes of the city. Part of the main aqueduct can be seen further east in Split. A river used to run by the city, and the remains of a 5-arch bridge can be seen. We cross over the city gate, the Porta Caesarea, which would have had 2 towers and large doors. All traffic into and out of the city would have passed through these gates. The governor's residence was also located in this area. Next, we walked down towards the forum and theater area. This was kind of hard to find, and we wandered around a bit before we found it. It is next to a highway, so you don't get the peaceful, meditative vibe you get in the rest of the site. The forum and Curia and theater complex would have been the center of the imperial Roman town. This would be a main meeting place, a place for official religious functions, and an entertainment center. The temple here was dedicated to Dionysius. The theater auditorium could seat 3,000 people and had dressing rooms and a place for the orchestra. The existence of the theater shows that Salona or Salonium was a sophisticated and cultured city. If you visit Salona, it'll be worthwhile to hire a guide to take a tour, as the jumble of stones are sometimes hard to differentiate. After leaving the Civic Center, we pass yet another basilica. This is the oldest basilica, called the Basilica of the Five Martyrs, built over the spot where a Christian priest and 4 Praetorian guards of the Emperor Diocletian, were all put to death in a grisly fashion in the Amphitheatre not far away. The 4 soldiers were bodyguards of Diocletian, sent to arrest Bishop Domnio. When they refused to do so, all 5 were killed in the amphitheater, fed to the lions, I would like to imagine. Along the road, there's a line of smashed sarcophagi, long ago looted by some Goths or Avars. A little further on, we come to the amphitheater. The star of the show, really. This is a monumental structure that would have held 17,000 spectators back in the day. It was a 3-tiered structure with 2 levels of seating and a 3rd level for standing room. Underneath were administrative rooms, dressing rooms for the gladiators, places for the animals, and a temple to Nemesis, the gladiators' goddess of revenge and destiny. On the arena floor, gladiatorial combat, animal fights, executions, and other forms of crowd-pleasing events were staged. Many Christians met their end here in the Christian persecutions of Diocletian in 304 AD.
Ooh, you okay?
Yeah, okay.
There's another section of the ruins called the Marusinac, which is another series of cemeteries and basilicas, but it's down the road a ways, and by this time it was getting dark and we were exhausted, and we had had our fill of ruined basilicas, so we decided to stop for dinner instead. We will have more to explore the next time we visit the amazing ancient city of Salona in Split, Croatia.